CatsCast, episode 24 for July 2024, Queen of the Mouse Riders by Annie Reed. Hello and welcome to CatsCast, your monthly feline fiction podcast. I'm your editor and host, Laura Pearlman. This month, I'm happy to bring you Queen of the Mouse Riders by Annie Reed. This story originally appeared in Pulphouse Fiction Magazine. Our author this week is Annie Reed. A prolific, versatile, and award-winning writer, Annie Reed has been called a master short story writer. She's a multiple Derringer Award nominee and has appeared in back-to-back issues of the year's best mystery volumes. She's a frequent contributor to Pulphouse Fiction Magazine and Mystery, Crime, and Mayhem, and is a founding member of the Uncollected anthology. She's even had a story selected for inclusion in study materials for Japanese college entrance exams. Annie can be found on the web at anniereed.wordpress.com and on Facebook as annie.reed.142. Our narrator this week is Summer Brooks. Summer has been a podcaster for nearly 20 years and a narrator for about 15 years. She's narrated stories for Tales to Terrify, Starship Sofa, Escape Pod, and others, in addition to hosting the podcasts Slice of Sci-Fi, the Babylon podcast, and Writers After Dark. She also watches way too much television. Now watch out for strange men riding small rodents and listen closely because there's something we need to tell you.
Queen of the Mouse Riders by Annie Reed. Narrated by Summer Brooks. Gurgling yowls echoed off the tiled floor in Sarah's bathroom, bounced off the ceiling, gaining strength, and intruded on what was turning out to be a very, very nice dream featuring the star of a movie she'd watched just before bed. In the dream, the star turned his incredibly expressive eyes in Sarah's direction, smiled his best enigmatic smile, and said, "Pardon me, darling, but is that your cat?" In the dream, he'd turned British. She happened to know he'd been born and raised in the Bronx. Dreams were just plain weird sometimes. "Yes," she said, "she's apparently caught a mouse." Starlight the Cat had a battle cry like a two-note yodeler gargling mouthwash. She reserved that particular cry for whenever she caught a mouse, or something that looked like a mouse, or a mouse-shaped stuffed toy. Most of the time, she'd only caught one of her toys, thank goodness. But on at least one memorable occasion, she'd interrupted a visit from Sarah's mother by presenting a live mouse as the third course for their lunch date. Sarah's mother was deathly afraid of mice. So where did Starlight drop the mouse? Right at her mother's feet, of course. Sarah's mother had screamed. Starlight had looked suitably insulted at having her contribution to the meal rejected. And the mouse? It had attempted a quick getaway, but Sarah had thrown a kitchen towel over the poor thing, taken it for an elevator ride, where she'd gotten a few odd looks from her neighbors, and released it into the wild in the bushes outside her apartment building. She'd laid traps after that, but no more mice appeared, living or dead. The dream, complete with the suddenly British Bronx-born movie star, dissolved completely as Sarah sat up in bed. She groped for her cell, thumbed it on to read the time, 2:38, and squinted in the general direction of her bathroom. The next to last thing in the world she wanted to do was get out of bed. But the very last thing she wanted to do was discover mouse guts in her bed anytime soon, or feel a live mouse running over her face. Yuck. The nightlight next to the bathroom sink threw a faintly ghostly glow into Sarah's bedroom. She slid out of bed and shivered as her feet hit the cold hardwood of her bedroom floor. "It's a good thing I love you, kitty cat." She tucked her feet inside her fuzzy pink slippers and pulled on at the zippered hoodie she'd left on the other side of her bed. She really needed to buy herself a robe one of these days, for late-night mouse rescuing, if nothing else. And there hadn't been anything else in longer than she cared to remember, hence the promising dream. Starlight did her gargle yowl again, louder this time. "Coming, Mousie," Sarah said. "And don't you dare eat it, baby girl, you hear me?" A second sound echoed off the bathroom tiles. Not a squeak. Sarah would have expected that, but an angry shout. A very high-pitched, tiny shout. Sarah stopped short, blinked, then pinched herself on the arm to make sure she was awake. Ouch. Yep, definitely awake, and probably bruised to boot. So what in the world was going on in her bathroom? She crept to the bathroom door, turned the light on, and poked her head inside. Starlight was crouched in her hunter kitty pose. She held something in her mouth that was vaguely mouse-shaped with brownish-gray fur and a long, thin tail. Only the tail had a fuzzy puff of fur at its twitching tip. Mice didn't have fuzzy tails, did they? And they certainly didn't have something that looked like a tiny saddle on their backs or little bits of colorful string on their heads that looked like a bridle. Sarah took all that in at a glance. What really caught her attention was the tiny figure standing right in front of Starlight, shouting at her cat. The figure was shaped like a man, but that's where the resemblance ended. No more than 3 inches tall, it was covered in grayish fur, at least the parts that Sarah could see since it was wearing tiny little pants, and had a sharp snout where a person's nose would be. It had big, mouse-like ears on the sides of its head, a raised row of darker fur that ran from the top of its head down the back of its spine, and held something long and sharp-looking in a hand that really looked like a rodent's paw, only with an opposable thumb. It was shouting at Starlight in a language Sarah couldn't understand. She'd never seen anything like it. She wasn't even sure anything like this could really exist in the world. She pinched her wrist this time, which convinced her, yet again, that she really was awake. Okay, now what? Practical Sarah took over. Whatever this thing was, it was threatening her cat. Maybe it had something to do with the mouse thing that Starlight had caught. "Hey, Starlight," Sarah kept her voice low. "Maybe you should drop the mouse." The little creature with the weapon turned his head toward her when she spoke, but it was little more than a glance. He was clearly more concerned with Starlight. She supposed she would be too if she was in its position. Sarah crouched down next to her cat. "Good kitty." She petted Starlight on her head and then grabbed the cat by the scruff of her neck before she could run away with the mouse, or whatever it was. Starlight's gurgling yowl changed to an angry growl, but after a moment she dropped the mouse, or whatever it was. The little thing ran over to the tiny warrior person, and he climbed on the mouse's back. Sarah expected the mouse and rider to make a beeline for the bathroom door. She jumped to her feet to get out of the way. Wherever they came from, they were welcome to go right back there, thank you very much. But she needn't have bothered. They headed toward her wicker shelves instead. Sarah hadn't done much in the way of decorating her bathroom, but her one extravagance was a white wicker shelving unit that held her extra towels. It gave her bathroom a little girlish personality. White wicker, rose-colored towels, and looked pretty against the gray tiles on the floor. The bottom shelf had just enough clearance from the floor for the mouse and its rider to fit. Oh, wonderful. She'd have to shoo them out from beneath her shelves, throw one of her towels over them, cart them downstairs, and release them outside. The last time she'd done that, she hadn't been wearing a nightshirt, hoodie, and fuzzy pink slippers. Here's hoping it was too late at night to run into any of her neighbors. Starlight crouched down in front of the wicker shelves. The fur on her tail poofed out as fat as a feather duster. She was still hunting them. Of course, she was a cat, and that's what cats did. Sarah scooted Starlight out of the way with one fuzzy slippered foot, earning another growl. "I'll make it up to you later," she said. She grabbed a bath towel off the top of the stack on the bottom shelf and unfolded it, took a deep breath to steady her nerves, and moved the unit away from the wall. But there was nothing there. Nothing but the tiled floor that had always reminded her of the way clouds looked on a warm spring morning. "Where did they go?" Sarah asked. Starlight flicked her tail in annoyance and stalked out of the bathroom. Sarah supposed that was about as good an answer as she'd get. She got down on her hands and knees to peer underneath the bottom shelf. Not a thing, unless a couple of minor league dust bunnies counted. She took all the towels off the shelves and shook them out, one by one, but nothing fell on the floor. She even felt along the bathroom wall. Other than an uneven spot where there was a seam in the molding, she felt nothing out of the ordinary. She put her hands on her hips and sighed. What exactly did she expect? A secret doorway or something? One of those mouse holes like she saw in the cartoons she watched when she was a kid? A cute little miniature door complete with handle and hinges and tiny flower pots on either side? "You're losing it," she muttered. A huge yawn overtook her. As her jaws creaked, she thought about how silly the whole thing had been. Starlight had caught a mouse, that was all. The rest of it never happened. She'd had a very vivid dream brought on by a great movie, a sexy star, who really should be British, and a total lack of a love life. She slid the wicker shelves back into place, folded and replaced the towels, and turned the light off. Her bed, and hopefully her dream date, awaited. Starlight was already curled up on the other side of the bed, pretend sleeping. Only the flicking tip of her tail gave her away. "Good kitty." Sarah scritched Starlight behind one ear. "Good to know you're here to protect me." "And the mouse?" Sarah didn't have the energy to go looking for it. It would go back to wherever it came from, or she'd deal with it in the morning. At least, with Starlight on the bed, no sane mouse would come anywhere near her. Famous last words. Sarah had brought Starlight home from the pound after a particularly bad breakup. Not with a guy, but with chocolate, and coffee, and black tea, and salt. Basically, anything that would kick her heart rate into overdrive was off the menu, permanently. Tea? Okay, she could give up that. She even learned to live with herbal alternatives, some of which were pretty tasty. Coffee was harder. Decaf tasted nasty and, as it turned out, wasn't totally caffeine-free. Even though her cardiologist gave her the raised eyebrow and the not quite as comforting as it sounded opinion that it won't kill you, all of the poundy, skippy heartbeats made her feel miserable, so out with the decaf too. And potato chips. Canned soup. Salted nuts. all out. Chocolate, though, that had been hard. Sarah had been a chocoholic all her life. Pretty much anything chocolate topped her list of best things to eat ever. Chocolate cake, brownies, chocolate chip cookies, homemade fudge, hot chocolate, mocha lattes, even chocolate chips right out of the bag. Total comfort food. And all strictly verboten. It took her months to say goodbye to chocolate, and like any emotional breakup, there'd been setbacks. Times when she thought just a cookie here or a bit of brownie there wouldn't be so bad. Reality, of course, had taught her otherwise. The fourth time she quit chocolate cold turkey, she found herself at the pound, adopting a cat named Starlight. Starlight was a beautiful big girl with long white fur and sapphire blue eyes. She had the faintest brownish tabby markings down her spine and around her nose and eyes. She'd been in a room with a bunch of other adult cats, but while those cats played or slept sprawled out on the furniture, Starlight sat on the highest platform of the room's lone cat tree like a regal princess surveying her kingdom. The volunteer at the pound didn't know much about Starlight's background, only that she'd been surrendered by her former owner because she'd been a difficult cat. They could only guess her age, somewhere in the adult range, without being a senior kitty. Sarah didn't even hesitate at the difficult description. The moment she'd looked in Starlight's eyes, she felt like the two of them had been meant for each other. If it was possible to be soulmates with a cat, Sarah had found hers. She took Starlight home, and for the past 2 years, except for the unfortunate mouse incident during that luncheon with her mother, Starlight had never even been close to difficult. Until tonight. Another yowl woke Sarah up from a sound sleep at 5 minutes to 4. This yowl had nothing to do with hunting and everything to do with feline anger. Sarah could commiserate. Starlight, what in the world? This time, Sarah didn't need the nightlight from her bathroom to see what was going on. If she could believe her eyes, that was. Starlight was crouched on the foot of Sarah's bed. The cat was surrounded by at least a half dozen of the weird little mousies and their riders, each of them glowing with a soft, luminous golden light. Sarah blinked and rubbed her eyes, but when she opened them again, she saw the same thing. Or almost the same thing. This time, she saw the little man perched like a bird on top of her dresser on the other side of her bed. Hey! She pulled up the covers to her chest, dislodging half the mouse riders from their mounts in the process. What are you all doing in my apartment? She pulled the covers up higher. And in my room. She didn't expect an answer. She hadn't understood the mouse rider before, so it stood to reason that they couldn't understand her. So she was more than a little surprised when the man on her dresser spoke back. We've come to take the dragon home, he said. He was maybe all of 2 feet tall. Hard to tell the way he was crouched down with his arm wrapped around his knees, with dark brown hair that brushed his shoulders and a vaguely mousy-looking face, sharp nose, receding chin, but not at all hairy. And he spoke with a British accent, of course. Didn't it mean you were going nuts when your hallucinations spoke to you in the same voice as the cute actor in your dreams? And did he say dragon? What dragon? She asked. The little man nodded at Starlight. They've been seeking her for some time now, ever since she... He paused, looking for all the world like a man who's lost his train of thought. It didn't take long before he snapped back. Went on walkabout, I believe is the phrase you use on this side. Not British, Australian. Easy to confuse the two when you're losing your mind at 4 a.m. This side of what? She asked, refusing to deal, for the moment, with the fact that this strange little man, who was in her apartment, thought her cat was a dragon. The divide, he said, as if that explained everything. The divide. I can understand the appeal. I've been here myself for 3 moons now. Great food. Especially, what's it called? Chocolate? Marvelous stuff. Of course. Her diminutive nighttime invader was a chocoholic. Could this get any weirder? Maybe she shouldn't ask. You do realize that's my cat, not a dragon, she said. The fluffy dragon cat was currently hissing and spitting at the mouse riders, who didn't seem all that concerned. Why wasn't she swatting them? Starlight had a pretty good right hook, something Sarah had discovered when she'd lobbed a scrunched-up CD wrapper at Starlight just to see what she'd do. Starlight had punched the thing right out of the air. Maybe it was the weird glowing fairy lights. Fairy lights. Had she just really thought that? The little man shrugged. Cat, dragon, what's the difference? Dragon, big scaly beast who breathes fire. Cat, cute, cuddly predator who catches mice and purrs when you scritch her under the chin. Not the same thing. Cats don't breathe fire, she said. His eyebrows raised, giving his strange mouse-like face a cartoonish look of surprise. Your dragons breathe fire? She sighed. We don't have dragons, but if we did, they'd breathe fire. That doesn't make any sense. I know exactly what you mean. Starlight screeched as one of the mouse riders, still surrounded by that golden glow, took several small steps towards her. Hey! Sarah yanked at the covers. You leave my cat alone. But this time the mouse riders were ready for her. They stood their ground. This was ridiculous. I don't know who you think you are, but you better leave her alone. She didn't want to hurt anyone, but she wasn't going to let them hurt Starlight, who clearly didn't want anything to do with any of this weirdness. Sarah leaned over, intending to brush the little mousies and their riders off the bed. When her hand touched the golden light surrounding one of the riders, the room seemed to suddenly shift. Not so much in location. It was still her room, and she was still sitting on her bed, but instead of a cold, dark, kind of utilitarian rented apartment, she got an impression of warmth and growing things and little specks of light that were really tiny beings who lived in the air. Whoa, Sarah said, pulling her hand back. She rubbed it where it stung from the contact with the fairy light. No wonder Starlight didn't want to touch them. They're not going to hurt her, but they're not going to let her go either, the little man on her dresser said. She's their queen. Queen? Her cat was queen of the mouse riders. Could this night get any weirder? Well then, can you tell them to stop doing that to her? Sarah waved her still stinging hand at the mouse riders. She doesn't like it. Starlight was crouched down on the bed, her beautiful blue eyes dilated nearly black. She'd never looked less like the regal princess she had in the pound, and that nearly broke Sarah's heart. "And you can't take her away," she said again. "She's my only friend." Which was actually true. Sure, she had work acquaintances, and there was her mother. Now that Sarah had grown up and moved out of her mother's house, they actually had a pretty good relationship. But the only one who really shared her life, her ups and downs, and all the secrets she could never tell another living soul, was Starlight. "Well, of course you can come with her," the little man said. "You're the servant to the dragon." Servant to the dragon? "I am not," she started to say, but then she thought about who cleaned the litter box and who bought the food and who stopped doing whatever it was she was doing whenever Starlight wanted to sit on her lap or be petted. Sarah couldn't remember the last time she'd opened a book without Starlight draping herself over the exact page Sarah was trying to read. Maybe she was the dragon's servant. "What if I don't want to go either?" she asked. "And go where exactly? And how did you get here anyway?" "Through the door," he said. She wasn't sure if that was an answer to the second or third question, but either way, it didn't make sense. "You couldn't have come in through the door. I'd have heard you. It's locked and I set the alarm." He scratched his head and looked at her with one eyebrow raised. "You know how to lock a door?" He shifted on the dresser and stretched out one leg, grunting with the effort. "I don't even know how to do that, and I'm sure you didn't know it was there. Not many people on this side do." As he spoke, she realized his Aussie accent had totally disappeared. Now he sounded like he'd lived in her neighborhood all his life. Not that it mattered. He was clearly nuts because she was clearly nuts, and in the land of the crazy, accents came and went, just like her dream British version of that actor from the Bronx. Starlight's yowl turned into an angry shriek. Sarah realized she'd only been paying attention to the little man on her dresser. She whipped her head around toward her cat, who'd been backed into a proverbial corner, or circle. The little mouse riders had all converged on Starlight. Their golden light formed a nearly solid ring with Starlight in the center, and she'd clearly had enough. Her ears were back, her teeth were bared, and if she could have breathed fire, Sarah's bed would be in flames. Starlight was going to fight back, and when she did, when she touched that ring of golden light, well, Sarah had a sick feeling that's how the mouse riders would retake their queen. And here she'd been sitting on her bed the whole time, doing nothing but talking to the little man about doors that didn't exist. He'd been intentionally distracting her. And she'd let him. "You bastard," she said. She dove for Starlight, and the mouse riders closed the little gap in the ring of light. Sarah grabbed Starlight, but she was too late. The foot of her bed disappeared. All of them. The mouse riders and their mounts, Sarah and her yowling cat, plunged through the portal in the center of that ring of light. The first thing Sarah felt was a soft bapping against her cheek, fuzzy and rough with just a hint of pinpricks. "Wake up," came a soft, scratchy voice. "You've been asleep long enough, my dear." Sarah managed to slit one eye open, sort of. Her brain felt mushy and someone had stuffed her head full of cotton. Her nose tickled all the way up to her eyebrows and a headache hung just on the horizon of wakefulness. Her chest felt heavy, like she might be coming down with a cold. Boy, she must have had way too much wine last night with that movie. Or did she have any wine at all? She couldn't remember. But she must have, because she certainly had the hangover of all hangovers to go with it. She closed her eye against the golden first light of morning. She didn't need to be up at the crack of dawn. She had another good hour at least before her alarm went off, so why in the world was her mother trying to wake her up? Only that wasn't quite her mother's voice, was it? Sarah forced her eyes open and came face to face with Starlight, who was sitting upright on Sarah's chest, one paw raised next to Sarah's cheek. "That's better," Starlight said. Sarah blinked and opened her eyes all the way. Her cat was talking. Her cat was talking. Her cat was... "I've gone totally crazy," she muttered. Instead of little mouse people, now that she'd opened her eyes, she remembered that part of last night clearly. "I'm imagining I'm in one of those kids' movies where dogs and cats talk." She'd always thought the talking pet movies were kind of creepy. She'd told Starlight so many secrets during the time they'd been together. The mere thought that Starlight could pass that information along was just plain wrong, with a capital W. Starlight bapped Sarah again with her right paw. Sarah felt definite pinpricks this time. "Ow!" "I'm sorry, dear," Starlight said. "I realize this is all quite a shock, but you need to snap out of it." Shock? That put it mildly. Compared to discovering that her cat could talk, accepting the rest of what her senses told her about where she was should have been a breeze. Especially since she'd gotten a preview when that golden fairy light had stung her hand. She was laying on a bed. Not her bed, unless her bed was made out of overstuffed pillows decorated with tiny living flowers in a myriad of colors. She felt a sneeze coming on and stifled it. Teach her not to take her allergy meds before bed, but who knew? The room she and Starlight were in wasn't exactly a room, but more like a hollow inside a very large tree. Like the largest tree Sarah had ever seen, only with windows cut through the living wood decorated with more grasses and flowers and an arched doorway. A gathering of little floaty sprites or fairies hovered near the top of the hollow, giving the room its soft light. "Where are we?" Sarah asked. Starlight sat back on her haunches. "On my side of the divide. Those little hooligans succeeded in opening the portal. I'm sorry you were dragged through along with me." Divide. Again. Divide between what? Starlight sighed. It was a weird thing to see, a cat sighing in frustration. "Between your world and the world of magic. You didn't think all the magic in creation simply disappeared in the Age of Enlightenment, did you?" Sarah hadn't really given it much thought before tonight. "The two merely separated," Starlight said. "Magic on one side, technology on the other. But not all the way." "No. Although so far, only the magic side has been able to open the portal intentionally." Those sapphire blue eyes were staring intently at her again. Did I do something to open a portal? Sarah asked. To put you in jeopardy? Another kitty sigh. No, I did. Starlight lifted a paw and began to wash her face. A kitty stalling tactic if Sarah ever saw one, but then stopped. I gifted you a dream. The British-sounding movie actor was a gift from her cat? You did that? Come to think of it, Starlight sounded vaguely British too. Dowager British. Maybe she really was a queen. You've been alone for some time, Starlight said. I remember how that felt. Good Lord, even her cat felt sorry for her. Sarah really had to do something about her love life, if she ever got out of here. Starlight's ears flicked backward, and her tail whipped around her haunches. The little annoyances are coming back, she said. The mouse riders? The gods' idea of karma for all the mice my kind killed before the split. When they made you their queen? The gods in this world apparently had a keen sense of irony. And the mice people were okay with that? Starlight sighed again. Even here, people want to be ruled by someone powerful enough to protect them. Or eat them. There is that, my dear, Starlight said with a positively wicked look on her face. But you don't want to be their ruler. That much had been obvious by how hard Starlight had fought to stay on the other side, Sarah's side of the portal. Ruling people who are afraid of you is tedious. I grew tired of finding new ways to torture them. Cats did play with their prey. That was the whole reason the mouse Starlight had brought to Sarah's mother had still been alive. Starlight hadn't been done playing with it yet. Still, the idea of Starlight deliberately torturing the mouse riders because she was bored? More than a little disquieting. It's a wonder they don't rise up against you, Sarah said. I wish they would, or at least oppose me. I find life much more agreeable on your side of the divide, at least with you. Aw, that's sweet. Sarah started to reach up to scritch Starlight behind one ear, then paused. Is that okay? I mean, is it okay to do that here? Starlight purred deep in her throat. If you don't let the little annoyances catch you, behavior unbecoming a queen and all that. Sarah scritched Starlight, starting behind one ear and ending up beneath her cat's chin. Starlight's purr increased in volume, and she got up on all four paws so she could knead Sarah's ribcage. Sarah would probably have little paw-sized bruises all along her ribs later, but she didn't care. Starlight was acting like the cat she'd always loved, and it clearly made Starlight as happy as it made Sarah. Why didn't you ever talk on my side? Sarah asked. Right there, Starlight said, sticking her chin out for more rubs. Would have given me away just as surely as giving you the dream. None of us talk on your side. None of them. Are all kitties like you then? Magic from this side? Heavens no. But there are more of us than you think. We're usually labeled difficult, and rarely stay on your side for long. Even among cats, we're more independent than most. Otherwise, Starlight did the little kitty equivalent of a shrug, flicking her tail to one shoulder. No one would be able to tell us apart. No one? Sarah was beginning to get a glimmer of an idea. Not even on this side? Starlight's tail flicked again. What are you thinking of? I can see in your eyes that something's going on in that head of yours. Sarah smiled. I have an idea how to get us both home. Sarah's idea would only work if no one had heard Starlight speak since she'd been on the magic side of the divide. Starlight confirmed that she hadn't spoken to any of the little annoyances and assured Sarah that the tiny beings of light who hovered at the top of the hollow inside the great tree did not concern themselves with such things. Think of them as mosquitoes, Starlight said, without the blood-sucking bites. Finally, something to recommend this side of the divide. Sarah never thought she'd get tired of flowers, but they were everywhere here, and she'd been stifling sneezes ever since she woke up. Her portal traveling hangover was only marginally better, and her stomach was rumbling. Starlight had offered her something that looked like fresh mown grass mixed with fermented leaves, which Sarah had politely but firmly declined. Sarah had explained her plan to Starlight, who first looked affronted, but then, as the idea took hold, got that wicked look on her face again. Think of it as play acting, Sarah told her. You want to go home, don't you? The plan went into motion when the first of the mouse riders marched into the hollow of the tree. Sarah wasn't surprised to see they were accompanied by the little man who'd perched on her dresser. I don't know what you did to me, Sarah said, working up a good head of righteous anger. It wasn't all that hard. But I want you to send us home. The little man shrugged. You can go home, but the queen must stay. She's not a queen, she's a cat. And she's mine. Sarah picked up Starlight and held her in a tight hug. Usually that would have earned her an annoyed meow, an angry tail flick, and racing stripes on her arms from Starlight's back claws as she launched herself to the floor. Instead, Starlight wrapped her front paws around Sarah's neck and issued a pitiful little meow. You're scaring her, Sarah said, before she began whispering baby talk nonsense into Starlight's ear. The little man blinked, then turned to the mouse riders. More had come in the hollow, and even more were crowding around the door, trying to get a look inside. Sarah had lost count of how many there were. Most of them were holding weapons. The little man chattered at the mouse riders who'd first come in. Some sort of welcoming delegation? Then turned back to Sarah. You are mistaken, he said. They were drawn to her because she performed magic. What magic? She's a cat. Sarah knew what magic they were talking about, but she wasn't about to tell them. More chattering between the little man and the mouse riders who were now gesturing angrily at Sarah and Starlight. Sarah felt another sneeze coming on, and she did her best to stifle it. Unfortunately, pollen won this time, and Sarah let out a squeaky chew. The mouse riders immediately stopped chattering at the little man and stared openly at Sarah. A few of the riders around the door scampered away, leaving their weapons behind. Don't do that! The little man looked as scared as the mouse riders he was translating for. You don't know the power you wield. With a sneeze? Who knew? Well, I sneeze all the time. I take pills for it, but they're obviously not working here, so you'd better let us go home before I sneeze again. She did a hitching inhale, like another sneeze was coming on. The rest of the mouse riders who'd crowded in the hollow to see what was going on squealed and fled, and the original delegation dropped their weapons and put their hands up. Some things, like, "I surrender already," must be universal, even on both sides of the divide. Good to know. She pretended to stifle the sneeze. The little man visibly relaxed. "Now," she said, "will you let us go home before I let loose with another one?" He gestured towards Starlight, but Sarah could see he was already defeated. "But the queen." "She's not a queen. Here, look. Would a queen let me do this?" She shifted Starlight in her arms so she could scritch her on her belly. Starlight let her head fall back, a look of pure kitty bliss on her face. Her rumbling purrs filled the hollow in the great tree. Now the mouse riders really looked defeated. Sarah could understand why. They'd lost their queen. "Look," she said to the little man, "tell them that they're really brave to come in here like this and to stay when everyone else ran away. Why don't they just try ruling themselves for a while? See how they like it. They might be really good at it." The little man blinked. "Does that really work?" She shrugged. "We keep trying." Coming back through the portal was far less traumatic, thank goodness. After they fell through the ring of light into her bedroom, Sarah felt like kissing her bed, kissing the gray tile of her bathroom, kissing her cat, although the look on Starlight's face told her it probably wouldn't be a good idea. Starlight had already endured enough indignities for the night. Not that they'd be living in this apartment much longer. They needed to move to an apartment that didn't have a door to the other side of the divide. Even though the little man had assured her that the mouse riders wouldn't be making a return trip, she didn't exactly trust him. And the way the mouse people had been so frightened of her, who knew if they'd decide someday to replace their dragon queen with a much scarier version? Sarah was very happy living on the technological side of the divide, thank you very much. As for Starlight, the runaway queen wouldn't be talking again any time in the near future. Talking, just like gifting dreams, would call attention to herself. Sarah wouldn't miss either. While the dream of the suddenly British Bronx-born star had definitely had possibilities, Sarah would rather have dreams born of her own subconscious. And as for a talking cat, that whole thing had just been too weird for words. Just like everything else this very, very strange night. Although it hadn't been all bad. Starlight had developed a new habit thanks to her experience on the other side of the divide. When Sarah finally crawled back into bed, hoping for at least a couple of hours uninterrupted sleep, Starlight curled up on Sarah's shoulder instead of at the foot of the bed. She wrapped one paw around Sarah's neck, nuzzled next to her ear, and purred up a storm. Sarah smiled. Kitty hugs from the queen of the mouse riders. Could life get any better than that?
And we're back. No mice were harmed in the making of this episode. That was Queen of the Mouse Riders by Annie Reed. Annie had this to say: "This story was inspired by an artwork print I purchased at an anime con over a decade ago. The artist had drawn a little creature riding the back of a long-tailed mouse. That was the image I had in mind when I thought about the Mouse Riders. Also, one of my cats at the time had the exact same hunter kitty cry that I described for Starlight. After I wrote the story, I tried to find the artist to thank them for the inspiration, but unfortunately I've never seen that artist at another con." Annie's comments inspired me to look for some art of things riding mice, but it turns out there's much less of that out there than of mice riding things, probably because mice are small. So I searched for pictures of smaller things, specifically tardigrades, riding mice, but I didn't find any. At least, I don't think I found any. How exactly do you distinguish between a picture of a mouse being ridden by a tardigrade and a picture of a mouse? Anyway, this story was a fun, cozy portal adventure that demonstrated the power of cleverness, kitty scritches, and sneezing. I don't mean to brag, but sneezing is also one of my superpowers. If you enjoyed this story, you might like Annie's crime novel, Road of No Return, or her decidedly different holiday story, The Invitation, both released in December 2023 and available online. Today's cover art has appeared in so many places online that I wasn't able to determine its origin, but it's often cited as proof that cats are actually dragons, so I couldn't resist. If you do know who took this photo, please let me know. Come chat with us! If you're a Patreon patron, you can join the Escape Artists Discord server automatically through Patreon. Or you can find us on Blue Sky as @catscast.org, or on the social media service formerly known as Twitter as @CatsCastPod. We'll have a patron-only episode next month, but we'll be back on the public feed the month after that. In the meantime, you can find more narrative goodness on our weekly sister podcasts, Escape Pod for science fiction, Podcastle for fantasy, Pseudopod for horror, and Cast of Wonders for YA. Today's episode is brought to you by audio producers Wilson Fowlie and Dave Robison, assistant editor Tarver Nova, associate editor Aurora Hurd, and me, editor Laura Pearlman. Our opening and closing music is Easy Lemon by Kevin MacLeod. CatsCast is a production of the Escape Artists Foundation, a U.S. 501c3 nonprofit. This episode is distributed under the Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License, which means you can't change it or sell it, but you can share it as much as you like. CatsCast relies on listener donations, so thank you so much if you've already donated. You can support us and all the other EA podcasts by donating via patreon.com/EA podcasts or through the website escapeartist.net. You can also help us out by leaving a review or rating at Apple Podcasts or wherever you normally leave those things. CatsCast is distributed monthly on the Escape Artist Premium content feed. A separate public CatsCast feed gets a subset of those episodes. More details can be found in the show notes or at escapeartist.net/catscast. Thanks for listening, and until next time, we wish you all the purrs.